Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. First, your reaction to the U.S. and Ukraine agreeing to terms for this 30-day interim ceasefire. How do you view this development?
Well, look, this is a little bit of good news. First, the U.S. is undoing the pause on aid, undoing the pause.
The United States has started sharing intelligence and providing military help to Ukraine once again, with the goal of supporting a 30-day temporary ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. This choice follows a time when help was paused, showing the challenges of working together in global issues and solving conflicts.
Pause on information, intelligence sharing with Ukraine, which is good news. It was curious to me why we were being tougher on Canada, Ukraine, and Greenland than we were on Russia and Iran. We got confused, obviously, for a moment.
On Tuesday, the Trump administration changed its decision and announced that the U.S. would start sharing real-time intelligence with Ukraine again, along with resuming military aid shipments. In a shared statement with a group from Ukraine's government, U.S. officials said that the new focus would be to encourage Russia to negotiate and agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine within 30 days.
So that's good news that we're undoing those pauses. I think it's also smart that Ukraine is agreeing to the ceasefire and putting the onus on Russia to do it as well. So this is a good development at the moment, and I'm glad that the president and his team had figured out that it's Ukraine that's our ally and not Russia.
Ukraine is ready to agree to the U.S. plan for a quick, temporary 30-day ceasefire. This ceasefire can be extended if both sides agree, and it needs to be accepted and put into action by Russia. The United States will tell Russia that working together is important for reaching peace, said a joint statement from both countries' teams. The United States will quickly restart sharing intelligence and provide security help to Ukraine, it continued. The statement also mentioned the thankfulness of the Ukrainian government and its people for ongoing U.S. help.
Irrespective of how the Russians respond, this has changed the dynamic. I wouldn't say this puts Zelensky back in Trump's good graces. That's an exaggeration, but it certainly means that the Ukrainians have.
The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with his Ukrainian counterparts in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, after leaving Washington just a day before. He said that the offer would now be shown to Russia's government. Today, we have put forward an offer that the Ukrainians have agreed to, which is to start a ceasefire and begin talks right away to resolve this conflict in a lasting and stable way, said the secretary.
The way that Rubio had framed it on the way in was that this was going to be a listening session, that the U.S. side was going to be listening to the American side to eventually sort of come up with some positions that they could then take back to the Russians. This, Brianna, is a lot more concrete. This shows that not only is this U.S.-Ukraine relation.
President Donald Trump asked Russia's leader Vladimir Putin to join in talks during comments to reporters right after the joint statement from the U.S. and Ukrainian team. Recently, the U.S. president has shown confidence and warned reporters when asked about whether he had clear promises from Russia to negotiate honestly. But it is still not clear if he intends to apply any new pressure on Moscow to achieve that. I hope President Putin will say yes to that too, and we can get things moving, Trump said on Tuesday.
Today. I think it's positive. I was in contact with the Ukrainians as well, and they said it was very constructive meeting, very good discussions, and also the messages that come out are very good. And like the Secretary of State Rubio said, the ball is now in Russia's court.
Trump stopped sharing intelligence with Ukraine and canceled all planned aid shipments a week ago after a disagreement in the Oval Office with Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. His fans cheered the confrontation, but many in Europe laughed at it and found it unpleasant. Key U.S. allies like the UK and France saw this outburst as another sign that U.S.-Europe relations are changing a lot.
What about security guarantees? It doesn't appear that there are any in this deal.
Well, right now is the question of ceasefire, whether, there is any kind of ceasefire that holds and that is a show of goodwill that the parties are willing to make steps in that direction. I think, it's the first step.
On Monday, Trump suggested that the discussions about a U.S. brokered ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine were going well, but it's unclear how much the relationship between Washington and Kiev has improved. The situation with the rare earth minerals deal, which has been paused since the unfortunate meeting in the Oval Office, is still not clear. On Sunday, the U.S. president called his Ukrainian counterpart ungrateful during a televised interview on Fox News.
Do you expect goodwill from Russia?
I don't, but they are trying to play this game, showing that it's not them. But I think, this is really important to put the pressure on them, because they can stop this war anytime. And I agree with President Trump, who says
the U.S. president talked about Zelensky and the help given to Ukraine during Biden's time, saying what Zelensky did was as easy as taking candy from a baby. He's a clever person and he's a strong person, and he took money out of this country under Biden like it was nothing. In early March 2025, President Donald Trump decided to stop all U.S. military help to Ukraine for an unknown period, which included more than $1 billion in weapons and ammunition. This choice came after a heated meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, where Trump showed his unhappiness with Zelensky's dedication to peace talks with Russia. The White House said that the break was meant to make sure U.S. help worked towards a solution instead of extending the conflict.
And that is a big problem. The international law is really under heavy fire. And the question for us is what we do about this. Are we, developing the international law further? And I think, there are several elements that are needed. For example, accountability. What happens if you really do breach the UN Charter? Has to be more automatic.
The suspension greatly affected Ukraine's ability to defend itself, as its military depended a lot on U.S. intelligence and equipment to fight against Russian forces. Some people said that the break made Ukraine less strong, gave Russia more confidence, put pressure on U.S. partnerships, and made the humanitarian situation worse. On March 11, 2025, the U.S. said it would start sharing intelligence and providing military help to Ukraine again. This choice came after Ukraine agreed to a U.S.-suggested quick, temporary 30-day pause in fighting, depending on Russia's agreement. The ceasefire is meant to help make a good space for talks about peace and to deal with important needs for people affected by the situation.
So what can you do? Because right now it seems that the UN Charter doesn't have any teeth to it.
It definitely needs more teeth in terms of reaction and accountability. But what can we do is to really stick together with those countries who still value those principles in the UN.
The restart of help is meant to push Russia to accept the ceasefire and take part in real peace discussion. U.S. officials highlighted that the help is meant to back Ukraine's defense and promote talks to settle the conflict. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, was happy about the return of support and showed his willingness to talk about peace. He also showed he was open to talking about freeing prisoners and bringing back Ukrainian children who were taken away, emphasizing a promise to deal with humanitarian problems along with security issues.
Trust the former KGB chief based in East Germany when the Cold War ended, although for Vladimir Putin the Cold War never ended, and he has worked over the last several decades to attempt to reconstitute the old Soviet empire. That's a long way of saying no, I don't trust Vladimir.
The Kremlin is being careful in its response. Russian President Vladimir Putin turned down a quick ceasefire, saying that taking a break would help Ukraine without solving the main issues of the conflict. He stressed that any pause in fighting should result in long-term peace and tackle key problems like NATO growth. Putin shared worries about making sure a ceasefire is followed and the chance that Ukraine might use it to build up its military. Leaders in Europe have expressed solid backing for Ukraine amid rising tensions with the U.S. The European Parliament criticized the U.S. diplomatic moves as possibly forceful, and European defense ministers are talking about ways to strengthen security for Ukraine. World leaders like those from Turkey and Poland are still working together to help with peace talks.
Ukraine was observing a ceasefire in 2020 when they saw the bulk of their country invaded by Vladimir Putin. If the Russians stop fighting tomorrow, there would be no war. If the Ukrainians stop fighting, there'll be no Ukraine. So it has always been up to Vladimir Putin and Russia to end.
The restart of U.S. help to Ukraine is an important point in the ongoing conflict. It highlights the U.S. important role in helping Ukraine's defense and encouraging peaceful solutions. Still, the different opinions from those involved show the difficulties that lie ahead. The new help for Ukraine boosts its defense and makes it stronger in talks. For Russia, this action shows more global pressure to take part in real peace discussion. The support from countries around the world for Ukraine shows a shared goal of keeping the region region stable and upholding global rules.
Ukraine will abide by a 30-day ceasefire, but frankly, that's not the more difficult party to get to.
The success of the ceasefire and the peace talks that follow will rely on everyone involved being ready to tackle the main problems and agree on a lasting solution. The U.S. plays an important part in helping people talk and making sure everyone sticks to what they agreed on. The U.S. has decided to restart aid to Ukraine, showing a plan to mix military help with talks and negotiations. The different responses from Ukraine, Russia, and the world show how complicated the conflict is and how many ways there are to work towards lasting peace.